ESPN's latest NBA mock draft has the Toronto Raptors selecting Kyshawn George with the 19th overall pick. So over the course of this video, we're going to discuss whether or not this would actually be a good selection by Masai Ujiri's front office. Let's get into it. When Kyshawn George declared for the Miami Hurricanes ahead of his first and only college basketball season, there weren't really any expectations about the player getting drafted. But fast forward a year later, not only is he in serious conversations to go in the first round of the draft, he is actually getting some late lottery considerations to go with it, but there is a very good chance that he does end up being available for the Raptors with that 19th overall pick. Jonathan Givony of ESPN, who I feel as though makes the best and most accurate mock drafts on a year-to-year basis, feels as though the Raptors could go to the player in this position and feels as though it would be a great fit for the team. And we're going to answer whether or not that is true over the course of today's video by going through exactly who Kyshawn George is. We're going to talk about his college stats, his strengths, his weaknesses, an NBA player comparable before finishing off with the conclusion of whether or not Masai Ujiri should elect to draft a player again with that 19th overall pick. We're doing it all right here on Amateur Hour Sports, the YouTube channel completely dedicated to Toronto Raptors content, whether it be in live streams or videos just like this. Drop a like if you enjoy this video along the way, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well for additional Raptors content and plenty of draft content like this before we get to that late June day where we find out who the Raptors are selecting. And could that player be Kyshawn George? Like I said, played his first and only college basketball season with the Miami Hurricanes, and it's important to note he's not a true freshman here, has played overseas. That's why he came late to the U.S., where he likely felt as though he needed to come to the U.S. to get some draft considerations, and it appears as though that has worked. What's been very intriguing out the gate for Kyshawn George is the height, 6'7", without shoes, measured at the NBA Combine, but can easily be listed at 6'8" if we're going by the way the NBA measures their players. But you could even consider this guy potentially being 6'9". But what is so intriguing about the player's height is that in the last 4 years, he's grown like 9 or 10 inches, and it's possible at 20.5, as you see here, he may not be done growing just yet. Alongside this great size, this great height, he's got a wingspan of over 6'10" as measured at the NBA Draft Combine. And though his position has typically been listed as a shooting guard or a small forward, we're going to go through why this actually may not be accurate to where his best position is at the next level, but we'll get to that a little bit later on in the video. So, what did he accomplish in a season with Miami that was so impressive statistically that it has NBA scouts enamored with the player, wanting to select the player? And it's important to note, looking at these statistics, that it wasn't the highest of sample sizes here based on his minutes. He only averaged 23 minutes per game, but a lot of that was because he wasn't really in the regular rotation out the gates for Miami. He really grew into his role later on in the season, starting getting bigger minutes later on in the season because, like I said, he wasn't really expected to be much, and it turned out he might be a first-round pick in the NBA draft. So he grew into his role. That's important to note, but the most eye-popping thing about his statistic is absolutely that three-point percentage, averaging over 40% shooting from three this season, a field goal percentage of 42.6, and that gives us a lovely effective field percentage of 56.6. But as you see, not a ton of sample for the other statistics. 7.6 points per game, 2.2 assists, 3 rebounds to go with it. Definitely the most interesting thing about the player is the height, and it's the height going along with the shooting that we saw with the statistics. But if this is a player that is slated to go in the first round of the draft, that the Raptors could select 19th overall, what are the other positive traits associated with the player that scouts have been such a fan of? Well, the shooting is the big thing. He shoots the ball really well, as we saw, and he does so in different settings. He shot over 40% on catch and shoot threes. He shot over 36% on pull-up threes. So whether he's on ball taking a three, whether he's coming off a screen, movement shooting, catch and shoot, he can knock down shots from beyond the arc in many different settings, which is of great use to any NBA team, especially when you're a player of his size and length that we looked at earlier. He has grown 9 or 10 inches in the last 4 years. Could he get even bigger than the 6'7", 6'8" size he already has, 6'10" wingspan that he already has? There's a potential that that is going to be the case for Kyshawn George here. But what is interesting, again, about that growth spurt, that height difference, is that he's grown so much that he's now being able to play as a shooting guard, a small forward. But before that big growth spurt, he had success at his height playing more so as a point guard. So because he has so much experience as a point guard, he has a lot of these point guard tendencies. He is a good playmaker. He is a great passer. He is great at finding his shooters in the corners. He is great at finding players at the rim, on the inside, kick-out opportunities. He's a great passer and has a much better feel for the game than you would typically get for a player of this height, of this size, and of this experience. That bodes well for his developmental trajectory going forward, especially in the NBA, especially for a Toronto Raptors organization that really likes to work with the players of this size, with this length, with these traits associated with them. It's going to take some time here, as we're going to see, but there is certainly a ton of intrigue for Kyshawn George based off his shooting, based off his size, and based off of his overall feel for the game. On the defensive end as well, he possesses some good traits. Willing defender, good hustle there, knows how to draw charges. He has the frame to be an even better defender. He's a willing defender. It will need to improve. We'll get to that in just a moment here, but he's got the traits to be definitely a good defender at the next level. All of this gives you a super intriguing prospect with great upside for whatever position you want to lay him out in, whether that be as a point forward, maybe even as just a big point guard, whether it be as just a shooter from the outside. There are a lot of different roles that Kyshawn George can grow into in the NBA, but a lot of his weaknesses are going to need to be addressed. First of all, he is quite the raw prospect. It's going to take some time to really develop him for the next level, and the big reasons why are his scoring off the dribble. He's not an explosive player, not a super athletic player by any means whatsoever. He doesn't get to the rim well, like barely ever gets to the rim. Is not physical, can't blow by defenders. So what you really need to have to compensate that is shot making, pull-up jumper threat. And even though he shot over 36% on pull-up threes, he just does not score twos really. Like I said, he just does not have ways to manufacture spots at the rim. Doesn't have the speed, doesn't have the athleticism, doesn't have the strength, and it isn't compensated with jump shooting in mid-range. Now that's strange because he's a near 80 free throw shooter. He is an above 40% three-point shooter. You would expect to see a bit better shot making from a mid-range standpoint, but it just wasn't there for Kyshawn George. So that is going to be a worry because, if he's run off the three-point line, what else is he really going to be able to do there? Obviously, he's got the playmaking, he's got the passing, but there are a lot of traits that need to be worked on for Kyshawn George to really excel at the next level. Defensively, lateral quickness isn't his strong suit, keeping players in front of him. That certainly does need work. But again, this is about the upside. This is about the intrigue of a player of this size, that you can really work with them and mold this player for the next level. He's clearly got the traits to be a much better shot maker. He's clearly got the traits to be able to get to the rim and be effective. And because he's got the tools and the feel for the game out the gates, this is definitely something that I think the Raptors and a player that the Raptors and their development team, their organization is going to want to work with and develop, and they can have time on their side. They can definitely be a little bit patient with the player. One thing of note, he never really was an elite three-point shooter overseas. The three-point shooting came on as more of a surprise this season, so workouts with teams, draft combine results will be really indicative of Kyshawn George as a shooter. Is this for real? Is this not for real? We just don't really have the sample size to say definitively yes or no as of yet based on that one season with the Miami Hurricanes, as I said. So, Kyshawn George, we've heard everything about the player. We've heard about his traits. What is an NBA comparable that people have been likening towards? What's an NBA comparable that you should be likening him towards? Well, a popular one that I've seen online is Cam Johnson. Not as fond of that one, but I really do feel like the one I've come up with here is the best to really give you an indication of who he is right now, and that's Kyle Anderson, slow-mo. I don't think he's quite as slow as slow-mo, but slow-mo can be effective based on his feel for the game. He doesn't have the burst, but he has a great sense for the game. He can be a point forward. He can handle the ball. He can still create advantages for himself and his teammates, even with maybe a little bit of a lack of athleticism. Now, the thing for Kyshawn George is he's still very young, and this growth spurt is very recent. Maybe he needs a little bit more time to fill out into this body, to grow into this body, and when he does, or we get a lot more of an explosive athlete, that's what I would be looking at in this situation. But even as it is currently, there is a good feel for the game and a good base to work with. A player like Kyle Anderson has showcased that you can still be effective in using these methods. And Kyle Anderson isn't even that much of a three-point shooting threat. Has been more recently, but not a severe three-point shooting threat for other teams to consider, whereas Kyshawn George potentially could be for the NBA level. So, is this a player the Raptors should consider drafting with the 19th overall pick? I'm going to come out of the gates and say, I really like this prospect. He has been mocked in the latter stage of the first round, in the higher stages towards the lottery in the first round. I think that the people who have him lower in their mock drafts for the first round will eventually switch and have him higher, because I feel as though that this guy's going to blow away some projections here. I can definitely see a development team, a scouting team, really falling in love with this prospect, and I can absolutely see that team being the Toronto Raptors. This is just the exact type of player that they want to work with. This 6'9", athletic wing, long athletic wing dream, vision that they have, whatever you want to call it. What is going to make that work for Bobby Webster, Raptors GM, Masai Ujiri, Raptors president, what is going to make that work for these guys is the athletic wings, or the long wings rather, that can shoot. They just haven't had that previously. Here's one that can shoot and be shaped into a much bigger threat offensively based on the traits and tools that he already has in his locker, and has the frame to be a very good defender at the NBA level. We already know he can shoot the ball. We have a good idea about it. And there are so many other traits that development teams can work with and shape. And the Raptors, who have the 905 team, who have the ability to give play time to players right now, this is a good situation, I think, for Kyshawn George, and I think it's a good situation for the Raptors to get the most out of player and his very intriguing and interesting developmental trajectory. Is he going to be top of my list of 19th overall? Probably not, but I would really be interested and excited about the prospect of the Raptors really taking on this project here to see how far he can go in the NBA, because right now, Kyshawn George might only be scratching the surfaces of his potential, and the Raptors can really start to dig in there and find some things that maybe we didn't know Kyshawn George had. So, what are your thoughts on Kyshawn George? Sometimes Raptors fans can be a little bit intimidated by a project sort of player, but I would relish the opportunity to see what the Raptors could do in working with this player. Would you draft him with the 19th overall pick? Would you be happy with selecting him with the 19th overall pick? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, because that is it for me for today. Drop a like if you did enjoy, subscribe to the channel for more Raptors content, and I will see you again next time for another video.